welcome to JudgeCast. This is episode 9 of our, can't quite call it brand new series anymore, of YouTube videos focusing on how to become a level 1 judge. My name is Bryan Charles, and I am joined this afternoon, evening, morning drive to work by the one and only Charles Featherer.
Hello, hello.
And the one and only Marco Sanchez.
Hello, everybody.
So this is, as I said, part 9 of an ongoing series where we have partnered with Foundry. Marcos?
So this episode and the entire series of L1 Essentials videos is sponsored by Foundry. Foundry is a membership-based nonprofit organization serving the US and Canada and providing certifications for tabletop gaming officials. They manage everything to do with obtaining and maintaining your certification and provide educational resources, just like this one here, to ensure that every Foundry certified judge has the knowledge and skills to be successful. When it comes to running Magic events at your local game store or at a larger international convention, Foundry is a great resource for you to certify your skills. For more information on Foundry, visit judgefoundry.org and click on the orange Become a Judge button to find out how you can earn your level. The link is in the description below. And now, let's take some steps. First steps, many steps.
In this episode, we will discuss the steps to casting a spell. This will continue our focus on what a level 1 judge working Friday Night Magic or scheduled events at a larger event should know. As always, not every corner is explored in depth, but if you wish to go deeper or explore topics faster than these videos come out, you can delve into our extensive library at JudgeCast.com or search for us in your podcast app of choice. Our podcasts are typically at least 1 hour, so you get both more detailed discussion, humor, insight, and of course, our gleeful chittering?
Casting a spell is a multi-step process, as is everything in Magic, each with its own rules and implications. So a quick summary of the steps to cast a spell is we're going to announce the spell, we're going to choose modes and stuff, then select targets, determine how you're going to divide or distribute anything that needs to be divided or distributed, then we're going to check the spell's legality, determine the total costs, activate any mana abilities, and then pay them costs. All right, now that we've got the summary, let's go break them all down.
First up, announcing the spell. The first step in casting a spell is to take it from wherever it is, which more often than not is your hand, and putting it on the stack. Now, importantly, it is not cast just yet. That is all the way at the end. This is just the start of a very long journey. Now, if we didn't put it on the stack until all the decisions were made, you could do silly stuff like reveal a Surtland Elementalist to pay its own additional cost. And really the only thing sillier than that is playing Surtland Elementalist in the first place, because I bet you didn't know what that magic card did before I said it.
Yeah, but we all like big giant wizards. Anyway, the second step is kind of a catch-all for decisions that set up later steps. If the spell is modal, you choose your modes. If there are any additional or alternate costs, you announce your intent to use or pay them. If there's a variable cost, such as X, you set the value for X. You are supposed to announce which mana you'll use for hybrid mana costs, but very rarely do players actually do that. The same goes true for determining if you will pay life or mana for Phyrexian costs. Sometimes these choices will restrict what you can do. You cannot choose more than one alternate cost, and sometimes alternate costs have zone restrictions on where you can cast them from, like Flashback.
Okay, so up on the screen right now, we have Chocobo Kick, which has Kicker. We have Abrade, which has you choosing a mode. And then we have Elusive Otter, or really Grove's Bounty, which has you choosing a value for X. Okay, so now that we've determined modes and kickers and alternate costs and all that sort of stuff, we need to determine targets. Decisions made in the previous step, modes and such, can actually alter the number or type of targets we declare, such as with Cyclonic Rift, it has a target if you don't overload it, and if you do, it doesn't have targets. That overload choice is made during the previous step. With Cryptic Command, The modes that you chose can alter the number of targets. A cryptic command can have 0, 1, or 2 targets depending on what modes were chosen.
If a spell has a variable number of targets, you announce how many targets you will choose before you actually announce what those targets are. Once the number of targets is set, that number cannot change. So for example, you'll see Captivating Gyre here says return up to 3 target creatures to their owner's hands. Here's where you announce, okay, I'm going to choose 2 targets, or 3 targets, or 1, or even none if you found a reason to do so. Anything that triggers when a player or object becomes the target of a spell or ability will trigger at this time, but the trigger can't go onto the stack until a player receives priority once the spell is cast.
You choose your targets for each instance of the word target. So with Cone of Flame, when you are picking the first target, that's the one that will get 1 damage because it's the first target. And the third one will get 3 damage because it's the third. I bet you can't guess what happens with the second one. This is a bit different than, say, giving us 6 damage to divide up between 3 targets, like our friend Spreading Flames.
Next, we have to check to see if we have to divide or distribute an effect among the targets. Each of these targets must receive at least 1 of whatever is being divided. So for Defend the Celestius, it tells us to distribute 3 +1/+1 counters among 1, 2, or 3 target creatures you control. If you choose 2 targets, you have to select which one of those targets will get the 2 counters and which target will only get the 1. You cannot choose 2 targets and then give all 3 counters to one of them and none to the other.
Now, here's a distinction. So if you look at the cards on screen, Blessing of Frost and Fireball, they both look like they may interact with this dividing and distributing step. We are distributing and dividing, but there are some very distinct differences. With Blessing of the Frost, there are no targets, so we don't need to pick the creatures or how we will be distributing the counters until the spell actually goes to resolve. With Fireball, there are targets, but we don't choose how to divide the damage. The spell says divides evenly.
Now we check to see if the proposed spell can be legally cast. This is because there are a lot of effects that can change an object on the stack, and if you are not allowed to cast a certain type of spell at this time, we do a check. For example, if you are allowed to cast a creature spell as though it had flash, and you cast a bestow creature and choose to cast it for its bestow cost, it's no longer a creature spell with flash and cannot be cast. We're going to talk a little bit more about how to know what you can and can't cast at the end of the episode.
Next, we determine the total cost of the spell. Normally this is just the mana cost, but other things can change that. Sometimes we have alternate costs or additional costs on the spell itself. Some effects can increase or reduce the cost to play a spell, or even provide another alternative cost. The way to figure out the total cost is you start with the mana cost of the card, or the alternate cost if it's cast that way, and then we add all additional costs first. Okay, so things like Thalia, Garden of Thraben. Then we subtract any cost reductions, like say Blood Funnel. And that's it. There's no other considerations.
Oh, there's one. And there's one that everybody always loves to point out. After we do the addition, after we do the subtraction, then and only then do we consider Trinosphere.
3-ball.
Yes. Now, don't worry, Trinosphere is not on the L1 exam, but we like to be thorough, and players do struggle with this constantly, and it is one of those rules that people do just kind of throw out there without really considering it too much. So moving on. If the total cost calculated requires a mana payment, then the player has a chance to activate mana abilities, like off of our Ignoble Hierarch here, or by sacrificing a goblin with our Skirk Prospector. Then, after mana abilities are activated, the player pays the total cost. You may pay costs in any order, minus a few very, very rare exceptions. And at this point, now, finally, your spell is cast. You're all done. Triggers that care about when a spell is cast would trigger now, and then players would get priority.
So let's talk about how some of these rules interact with our favorite cards. If we were to cast Fling and sacrifice Coruscation Mage, would Coruscation Mage's trigger allow it to deal damage to each opponent? To figure it out, we go through the steps to casting a spell. We announce Fling and put it onto the stack. We acknowledge the additional cost of sacrificing a creature. We declare the Fling's target. The spell passes the legality check. We determine the total cost is 1 creature and 1 red. Then we can tap mana. Then we pay the costs, paying the mana and sacrificing the creature. Then the spell is cast. At this moment, when the spell is considered cast, Coruscation Mage is no longer on the battlefield to trigger. You will not be able to deal 1 damage to each opponent via its trigger.
Boo.
All right, here's another example. Let's say I have 2 treasure token and no other mana available. Can I cast Refurbished Familiar? Okay, Refurbished Familiar has affinity for artifacts. It costs 3 and a black, has affinity for artifacts. Again, we're going to go through the steps of casting a spell. We announced Refurbished Familiar and put it on the stack. There's no modes, targets. There's no distributing anything. It's legal. We apply the cost reduction from affinity, and we determine that the total cost is 1 and a black. Now we have the opportunity to activate mana abilities, like those 2 treasure tokens that we have. You might be tempted to say, after I use them, but now I don't have those 2 artifacts to reduce the cost by 2, but we already locked in the total cost. We don't go back in time and change the cost once we figure out what it is.
Now, in the middle of casting a spell, we said we check to see if the spell can be cast legally. So for this, we're going to talk in general here and focusing explicitly on what is needed for the L1 exam. However, I do think we need to and will do a deep dive on the podcast side of things. So make sure to check in the comments below and the information below. There will be a link to the podcast that deep dives on casting a spell legally as soon as we actually record it. Promise. But the main rule you have to consider here is a player can begin to cast a spell only if a rule or effect allows that player to cast it, and no rule or effect prohibit you from casting it. So in essence, you may begin to cast a spell if you are allowed to, and if nothing is telling you that you can't. Both have to be true.
It's just funny that the rule is you can do it if you can do it.
Right, exactly. And
You can
them's
dance
the
if you
magic
want to.
rules.
Right?
You can cast if you want to.
Yeah.
However, there are decisions you can make during casting a spell that would make the spell legal to cast, but aren't legal at the exact moment. For those, you can look ahead.
For example, if an effect says you can't cast a spell with certain qualities, but the act of casting that spell would change that quality, you can still cast the spell, provided you can make it past the restriction. So if your opponent has a Void Winnower, which has the helpful text, your opponents can't cast spells with even converted mana cost, you can still cast the spell, the Meat Hook Massacre, if X ends up being an odd number, because on the stack, the spell would have an odd converted mana cost. If an effect allows a player to cast a spell with certain qualities, as though it had flash, you can consider any choices made during that spell's proposal that might let it meet those qualities.
All right. Next up, there are some cards that have an alternate set of characteristics, like adventures or omen cards, and some rules can give cards an alternate set of characteristics, like morph. If there are continuous effects that let you cast cards with the alternate set of characteristics, you can begin to cast them. Something that would let you cast an instant from the top of your library would let you cast Stomp, but not Bone Crusher Giant. Something that lets you cast a creature from the top of your library would let you cast Bone Crusher Giant, but not Stomp. Something that lets you cast auras and equipment spells as though they had flash would let you cast Thassa's Emissary for its bestow cost as though it had flash, but not if you were to cast Thassa's Emissary as just a plain old crab. things can get a bit more complicated based on the exact wording of the effect and the set of characteristics and cards that it applies to. But we will need to cover that in the deep dive podcast that Marcos promised us. And that's it. Spells cast.
Nice and easy, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So once again, we would like to thank Judge Foundry for their support in sponsoring this series, for helping you earn your level 1 certification. Make sure to visit judgefoundry.org and click on the orange Become a Judge button to learn how you can join the Magic judging community in the US and Canada and earn your certification with Judge Foundry.
Join us next time as we continue our series for earning your level 1 certification and dive into the wonderful thing about triggers. Triggers. And if you want to reach out to us, we have our own Discord server for judges new and old, fans, and anyone who supports the judging community. The invite link to our Discord is in the description below, as well as our JudgeCast and individual social media links. If you're a fan of our content, make sure to like and subscribe to our channel and ring that bell to be notified when new videos in the series are posted, or when a new episode of our full podcast is released. Make sure to check out our channel's playlists for a complete L1 series, as well as a Learn to Judge playlist with episodes from JudgeCast's history, focusing on helping you become a better judge. And as always, you can find everything relating to JudgeCast at judgecast.com. With that, I'm Charles Feather, and I keep it fair.
I'm Marcos Sanchez, and I keep it fun.
I'm Brian Perlman, and I can't even.